So, what I want to talk about today is the fact that the BRICS countries overtake the G7 nations in global GDP PPP to become economically more powerful. What does that mean? So, let's take this in very different parts. So, what does global GDP PPP mean? So, global GDP, a lot of people already know, is global gross domestic product is the most important variable when analyzing an economy in a capitalist society. However, most of the time is being taken at nominal value. Whenever you see PPP is a it's I think it's an even more important metric because it is basically a GDP based on purchasing power parity. It's calculated by dividing the GDP by the purchasing power parity, which is an exchange rate that removes price level differences between countries. Why is that important? Because all of those countries, Brazil, Russia, China, South Africa, and India, they devalue their own currency so that they become more competitive. Once you devalue your currency, your exports are more valuable and you import less. It's less attractive for your shoppers, for your local consumers to import products. So you incentivize your local industry quite a lot, and all of those they use. And GDP PPP, therefore, it gives you a real kind of touch of the economy. To give you a bit of pinch of salt here, is like China alone is bigger than the US when it comes to GDP PPP. That's because China devalues its currency so much. So China's economy is actually bigger than most people think. Okay, so we know what the BRICS are, right? So the BRICS terminology was created in the early 2000s to kind of highlight the fast growing economies of the world, and that would then compete against the G7. So to give you, I'm getting this source from this Twitter account, this Spectator Index, thank you. So this is the average annual GDP growth between 2001 and 2020. And you can see that so this is the average annual GDP growth between 2001 and 2020. Who is India, also part of the BRICS, 6.9. The next here from the BRICS is Russia at 2.4. Then you've got Brazil at 2%. The only one of the BRICS that is not here in the top annual average GDP growth between 2001 and 2020 is South Africa. I think it's because it faced a lot of problems in the later part of the decade. But if you compare against, the G7 economies, you can see here US 1.3, Canada 1.4, France 1.2, UK 1.2, Germany 1.1, Italy 0.3, Japan almost stagnant. So you can already see that over the last 2 decades, the BRICS economy have completely outperformed the G7 in terms of growth. But now for the first time, they're actually, in terms of GDP PPP, they're actually bigger than the G7 countries. If you don't remember who the G7 countries are, I just took this picture for you so you see it. They are Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, United Kingdom, and United States. They are, the seven big boys of the world that decide a lot of stuff when it comes to international monetary decisions, right? And then if you look at not only that, but what does that mean in terms of the dollar dominance, right? So the other big news this week is the fact that the BRICS are creating their own bank, and it is being called the New Development Bank. It is kind of an alternative to the IMF, which the IMF was created by the G7, and now the New Development Bank, the new president is the former Brazilian president, Dilma Rousseff, and basically the headquarters is in Shanghai, China. And they are now even thinking about launching their own currency. Just like the Eurozone have the euro, they're thinking about launching their own currency and challenging the US dollar as the world's leading currency. So let me just give you a snapshot of the currency composition of the entire global foreign exchange reserve. So this is the most important thing when it comes to currencies, is out of all the central banks, what kind of reserves do they hold? In what species? Is it because in the past, before we abolished the gold standard, everyone would just hold gold, but in 1973, I believe, we got out of the gold standard, and then a new world order started where the US dollar became the world's reserve currency. And to this day, even though the dollar has been gradually declining, it is still 59% of the world's entire exchange reserve currencies. The euro is 21%, the yen is 6%, the pound from the UK is 5%, and then a mixture of a lot of different ones are now 10%. So the BRICS, they really want to, pick up this other and put a lot higher and challenge the US. And a lot of people see two ways of making this work. So one of them is to create a BRICS digital currency that, as a cryptocurrency would pursue a lot of value and make it very easy for those 5 countries and the BRICS allies to kind of intercalate and purchase from each other. And or the other alternative is to go back to some form of gold standard or precious metals kind of exchange. And that those two things is a real big idea to challenge the US dollar, because right now the US dollar is not backed by anything but the promise that the US is the #1 economy in the world. However, if you look at the US debt to GDP, you can see why there is a huge incentive for this country to be challenging the US, right? So you can see, let's just see the growth from 1969 to 2023. I can already tell you that in 2023, the debt to GDP is around 130%, which is a hell of a lot. But I just want to show you, okay, what's the long-term trajectory of this tendency, right? Because it's something that, it's unbelievable sometimes when you think about it. So, as I said, in December 2022, we finished the US debt to GDP ratio is 123%. What does that mean? That means that the debt in the United States is 123% of their entire yearly GDP. So just to give you another piece of evidence, the IMF recognizes as high debt to GDP a certain percentage. I believe it's 80%, but let's just have a look what debt to GDP ratio is unsustainable. A debt to GDP ratio of 100%, let alone 200%, carries an unsustainable sounding connotation, deciding when the debt becomes unsafe by the IMF in 2022. So the IMF is currently the gold standard when it comes to, what is acceptable in the debt to GDP. And if you ever studied economics in a university, you will have read the book of this guy, Olivier Blanchard, because he's like in every macroeconomic book out there, okay? And according to this guy, when it becomes unsustainable, anything that is over 100% debt to GDP becomes somewhat unsafe. However, if you are part of the G7 countries, people will still have faith in your economy, you're very strong, you can get away with it for a while, especially if your interest rates are small, because you don't need to pay a lot of interest on your debt, okay? But let's get back to the debt to GDP in the United States. So I'm gonna just go through the max that they are able to present here to us. So 1970, the debt to GDP in the United States was under 40%, and now we are 130%. You can see these spikes, right? So Ronald Reagan government, he was like, let's spend more, let's grow more. Then 2008 crisis, let's get out of this crisis ASAP. And then COVID again. So those three big pushes of a lot of government spend, printing a lot of money, and that's where we got to the situation that we're currently at. Okay, what does that mean? That means that it's the perfect opportunity for China to lead the BRICS out of the US standard. Because if you think about it, what is happening right now is that Russia is still in war with Ukraine. You can see that Russia and the OPEC have had a lot of new developments, like Saudi Arabia is saying that is cutting ties with the US. They all also said that they're cutting production to boost the prices. Here it is, OPEC Plus announces surprise oil output cuts, and it's huge because it was not expected at all, right? And if you look at, okay, who is cutting what, you can see all of Russia's allies at this point in time: Saudi Arabia, United, UAE, right? So quite Iraq, Algeria, Oman, Kazakhstan. And it's obvious because some of those countries the US has invaded in the past, so they don't really like the US, but they're taking this opportunity to hurt the US as much as they can. So that is Russia, right? India is although the entire West is saying, hey, don't purchase oil from Russia, India's saying, you know what, this is our time to grow, fuck that. So India is operating well with the BRICS. Then China is taking that advantage. So China, they just brokered some peace deals, which is quite important in terms of politics, right? The truce deals between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And then not only that, China also has the Belt and Road Initiative, which is absolutely important. She is a massive China-led infrastructure project that, you know, it's basically benefit all those countries here. So you can see that China's influence is growing at this point in time. Now, going back to the other two, so you got Brazil and South Africa. South Africa is still at a turbulent time in terms of politics back in the country, and Brazil also wants to kind of reduce the dependence on the US, just because Brazil wants to go from, you know, an economy that is currently heavily reliant on commodities and natural resources to more technological basis. They're thinking about how can we create our own, you know, Amazon.com, our own Facebook, our own Instagram, you know, because that is how you grow in the future ahead, right? In the capitalist that you've got GDP outsourcing everything, automating everything. So that is it for today. I just thought that this is an incredible piece of news that is happening. I don't think that the US dollar is gonna decline out of the blue. Like it's a really gradual process that actually started about 20 years ago. But you know, Rome wasn't built in a day, but also Rome didn't decay in a day either, right? So Rome took centuries to build to the peak, to the summit, and then took centuries to go down. And I think the US is the same thing, right? So the US has been growing since its independence. And then the 19th century was very important, but most important was the 20th century for the US, especially with Europe destroying itself with the two world wars. And then after that, the US overcame the challenge from the Soviet Union, and since then has not had any real competitor up to now. Now it's got China, and China's got some really powerful kind of allies. Some of them, they're not straight allies if you really think about it. For instance, India and China, they are going head to head on a lot of political issues as well. But it really feels that there is something challenging the US, that it's not something to be scoffed at. And not only that, you've got some funny stuff as well. So Macron just also said that Europe needs to reduce its reliance in the US. I also found that funny because whilst his country is full of riots and protests regarding retirement age, he's shaking hands with China and saying, hey, Europe, we also need to kind of take this opportunity as well. I wasn't expecting. But also says a lot about what is the future of Taiwan, because right now it's looking like that the only person that would interfere would be the US and not like NATO, as is in the case of Ukraine. So I think it's a lot more likely that China actually takes Taiwan in the next few years. So a great stock to pick right now would be something related to semiconductors, right? And because Taiwan Semiconductor Company produces the majority of semiconductors in the world, so I think the US will have to reduce their reliance on that company, and they will probably go with Intel in the US that's been investing a lot. If not, maybe, you know, Samsung in the future, even though Samsung is having a tough financial quarter. But I'm gonna stop the video for now. I hope you guys like this. It's a different kind of video for my channel. It's more about news. If you did, drop in the comments. See you later.